You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that's always up to speed with the latest Formula One news. Follow us on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod and subscribe to the show on iTunes and Stitcher. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Dailey and Kevin Laramée.
And good day, good night, and welcome to Scuderia F1, the podcast that is always up to speed with, apparently, IndyCar racing and Formula One this week. Mark, it's been quite a busy weekend of race watching. I have to say, I'm mentally exhausted of seeing cars turn left and right, but mostly left.
Well, isn't that the truth? It was an absolutely epic weekend of sports. I mean, if you figure into the equation, the FA Cup final that went on Saturday as well, and then the Indy 500 in Monaco.
I'm trying to forget about the FA Cup final, Mark. I'm
sure.
Trying to forget about that. But yes, Indy 500 and Monaco. Oh, what a day on Sunday.
Absolutely. It started early too. If you got up early, especially on the west coast of Canada, and to watch this one, I think the race, I think the lights went green at about 5 a.m. in the morning, and then you could follow that up and start watching Indy basically right after that one finished. So it was a very, very long day, but very rewarding, and it was great. You know, as we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, this is about the first Indy 500 that I think I've really been into and really paid attention to in quite a number of years. And I really enjoyed watching the whole thing. So maybe that's the place to start, is maybe just talk about Fernando Alonso and how he acquitted himself, not just on race day, but basically over the entire month of qualifying and the rookie orientation. I think that for what Fernando did was nothing short of remarkable. I think he did a great job at Indy this year.
It's unfortunate that he doesn't have a big trophy to represent this race, because he did win Rookie of the Year for this race, Rookie of the Race, basically, best Rookie of the Race, and he did more than that. I think from the rookie orientation program on to the entire week of practice leading up to qualifying, to Carb Day, to the race itself, up until the point where his Honda engine blew. And how ironic is the fact that he skips Monaco because he's sick and tired of having technical problems with his McLaren Honda. And his McLaren Honda has trouble at Indianapolis. Oh, I feel terrible for Fernando. I feel terrible for Fernando Alonso. But Mark, the way he performed is A+. There's not a wheel wrong. He didn't put one wheel wrong, in the words of the commentator during the race. He was adulated by the fan when he came out of the car. There was a roar. There was a thank you aspect to that cheer from the fans in Indianapolis. He respected the race. He made himself look good. He made F1 look good. He made F1 driver look good. We've talked about how F1 drivers are robots and they can only drive those cars because, well, there's a lot of it's easier to drive. Well, maybe not this year, but before the last few years, it was basically a robot could have driven in a Formula One. And we actually are seeing now cars that are built without drivers that go faster than drivers. And maybe we'll talk about this in a future show. Electric cars that go faster without a pilot than with a pilot. That's crazy. But we'll talk about Formula One drivers. Look at Fernando Alonso, what he accomplished with McLaren Honda Andretti. He was part of the boys. He was one of the best. He had the fastest speed average by lap when his engine blew. So he did amazing, and he might have had a shot to winning that race. Sato was about fourth at the same time as Alonso's engine blew, and he was eighth, but he was climbing up the pack. He was seventh and came back down to eighth, but he was going to probably try on the other turn following it to climb back and probably would have been in the leading pack and fighting for the race. But it wasn't meant to be this year. The Honda, maybe he has to go to Chevy. Maybe that's how he get a chance next year.
I know when his engine blew so close to the end of the race, what was it, about lap 179 or something? He got within
21 lap to go.
Yeah.
21 lap to go.
Yeah. It was, like you say, it was unfortunately ironic. And he was just, I was impressed when you watched him right from when they started the race. And once he got into it, he looked like a guy that had been racing there for a long time. I did not have the feeling or the impression that Fernando Alonso was a rookie at Indianapolis. I thought he held his own when he got into the lead there and was up front. I thought he did a great job. Although, and I'll take just take this with a pinch of salt because I'm not the number one expert on oval racing or Indy, but just when he got into the lead there, I thought it was a little bit too early in the race, and of course,
but the reason why he wanted to maybe be at the front as much as possible is the yellow flags when there's restarts. It's a little bit easier if you're not experienced in restarts, in rolling restarts, to be in front than the back because you actually dictate the pace. And yes, you can, if you're not fast enough, you'll get overtaken really quickly. But at least you don't run the risk of getting run in side by side and stuck in a corner because you're first and you can dictate a little bit of the pace of the restart. And that's one of the reasons why I think Fernando Alonso wanted to run very high, if not on the first position, to be able to, yes, have clean air and be fast, but on top of it, be able to be more efficient on restarts. And he did well there too, like all the small intricacies of IndyCar racing compared to Formula One's, which basically is the oval type of racing, the pack and drafting type of racing that you do with open wheel racing. It's very particular to IndyCar series. Well, that's one of the aspects of what's amazing with what he did is how he adapted that really quickly, found ways to understand Indianapolis. AJ Job, which he knows this track more than I do, and the way he explained it to me is this track changes almost every lap. There's like not one lap that you'll actually have the same type of line around the four corners. There's always a little bit changing in every single corner every time, depending on the wind, track temperature, the air pressure, the amount of grip, the amount of rubber on the track. All those things combined makes it every single lap different. And he adapted to that. He adapted how to have a fast car late in the race, which is not a small feat. Be able to him with new teammates, like new team, new pit crew, communicating with them to be able to adjust the car during the race the right way so it's actually very performant, very efficient, and very fast late in the Indy 500. All those things that an F1 driver is not used to do to that extent, he had done perfectly. He did perfectly. And he would have been there fighting for the win, I'm sure. And every single, there's no negative out of this. Like on McLaren's side, it's positive. Alonso's probably going to come back, even though Honda should have bet for him once again. Sorry for my language, but it's about time we talk about Honda the right way. Alonso's going to come back to McLaren F1 with a certain renewed sense of, I am fast and I am good. And you know what? Give me that piece of garbage car that you gave me already and I'll do something with it. And that's kind of the attitude that he kind of has to shift forwards now with the rest of the season, right? He has to make do with what he has. But at least this weekend, it made us discover a different side of Fernando Alonso, a side of a real, true racer at heart and a kid that just wants to go fast. And it's kind of refreshing and it's kind of worrying because, hey, I was worried when Scott Dixon hit the fence, and we'll talk about this soon, Mark.
Wow.
Yeah, right? It could have been, that was a flashback of Greg Moore accident at some point. But
absolutely it was. Yeah.
Yeah, but luckily Scott Dixon came out with just a little bit of a limp, and that's kind of a miracle in itself. But Fernando Alonso, amidst all the risk, amidst the pressure, the controversy, the magnifying glass, because he was the darling, but he had a lot of pressure. Everybody was looking at him. Couldn't really miss that orange car anyways. It stood out, and that was kind of cool too. I think it's a positive for everyone involved, and I kind of wish it becomes either a yearly thing that Alonso does this, or maybe, why not, full-time racing in IndyCar Series for Fernando Alonso next year. Can you imagine what he's going to do with that car on a road circuit? Geez, he's going to be one of the, I actually want to see this now. Fernando Alonso, IndyCar Series 2018, the entire season. And I guarantee you, I'm doing a podcast for every single race of that season.
Yeah, it would be something amazing to watch Fernando. I mean, there's no doubt that he was an unprecedented success on the oval at the Brickyard, and to watch him maybe racing around some of these other circuits that the IndyCar series goes to, I mean, he would be dominant. I have no doubt about it. I mean, you take him and put him in a car that the Andretti McLaren Honda or whatever they called it, and then you put that on a road circuit, and you just take that natural talent that he has and the skills that he has, and I think that he would just run away with it. It would be absolutely amazing to watch. And I think basically what we're going to find out is whether or not Alonso returns to Indy 500 in 2018 and beyond, I think has a lot to do with what he's going to be doing or where he's going to be racing in Formula One, or if he's in Formula One at all in 2018. Yeah, because. But
the thing is now, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark. I was just going to say the thing is, he opened eyes this weekend. Maybe not just in Formula One world. Maybe an IndyCar team will lay a golden bridge to him. Like, he made a name for himself in North America with this race. How many F1 drivers can say that 300,000 people voted for him to be rookie of the race? Not a lot. And that kind of, I think maybe a team like Penske, which are trailing with Andretti right now, maybe they'll realize a big coup and get Alonso to go drive for them full time. I don't know, right? There's always, I think it's a possibility now.
It most definitely could be. And I kind of wonder how much longer Fernando's going to want to stick around in Formula One. I mean, he's said all the right things over the last couple of years that, he still wants to win races. He still wants to win championships. And this isn't even anything really that's unique to his time with McLaren over the past couple of seasons. He basically walked away early from his contract at Ferrari. I don't know what it took to get him out of that contract, because he still had quite a number of years to run on that deal before he even walked a couple of stalls further up the paddock to the McLaren garage. So that was a big thing, and I have no idea what sort of sales job that Ron Dennis and company did at that time to get Fernando there. But I just kind of wonder that you look at Fernando now, who's in his mid-30s. I mean, he's still obviously got a lot of talent, and he's not slowing down at all, and he's obviously very, very motivated to keep going. But if it's not going to happen in Formula One, maybe he steps away from there sooner than planned to race in IndyCar or maybe endurance racing or something else. I think it's going to be fascinating. There were a couple of other articles and news pieces that have come out over the last couple of days, and Fernando's basically acknowledged that Red Bull is the only top team that is completely closed for next year, because they've got Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen under contract. So there are questions. I mean, he does have options. I mean, Ferrari is a question mark. Mercedes is a question mark. I mean, Bottas has a contract, but next year is an option. So they've kind of left it open on the team side. So there are so many different things that could play out. And I think if you're Fernando Alonso, it's maybe a good situation to be in, because if he's going to walk away from McLaren, I think he's going to have no shortage of offers to drive not only in Formula One, but maybe anywhere he wants.
Yes, and I don't know if you read the article that Fernando Alonso, I don't know if you wrote the article, but it's on the Players Tribune, so it was directly interviewed him, so it's his direct comments, and he was talking about why he decided to do Indy 500, and in that article, and his explaining of why he wanted to do Indy 500, the gist of this is basically, when he was a kid and was watching, it was McLaren on TV with that orange car and Indianapolis, and it has an iconic image in his head. And that's what he thought of when he was watching racers, race car drivers. And he had a good idea of those days with the McLaren, and he was watching on TV, McLaren dominating in Formula One. And it's before he even knew Formula One, he was seeing other races. He grew up in karting in different situations in Spain where he was not even aware of Formula One until he got close to it, right? And it was a very interesting, I can't wait to read his autobiography, his biography eventually. His rise to F1 is interesting in itself. But Fernando Alonso always had that special place in his heart for McLaren because that's a team he used to watch on TV win. That's a team he used to watch dominate on TV. That's a team he saw winning races. And that's one of the reasons probably he made that move down the paddock to McLaren a few years ago. And that's one of the reasons why he wanted to do the Indy 500 too, is to test himself. And after all this, Mark, I would not be surprised that if my prediction would not come true, that next year maybe one of the reasons you keep Fernando Alonso with McLaren is you say, you know what, you enjoy your IndyCar series, you want to do full race there, full season there? We're going to get you a full season there. McLaren, Honda, and Andretti could be something for an entire season. It could be for maybe 2 cars. Maybe it's the beginning of a branding of a Formula One team in IndyCar series to make the relationship and partnership between Formula One and IndyCar better, the relationship better, and there's a certain crossover that attracted. I can't wait to dissect the ratings on Sunday. I'm pretty sure there had to be a spike for the 500. Come on, the amount of people on my timeline that usually never talk about Indy 500 or IndyCar series. Wow, it was amazing.
Yeah, it spiked all over the place. I believe, and I'm not sure of the exact number, but I do recall hearing something that viewership in the United Kingdom was up over 900%. So that's just the one example of the Fernando effect at Indy 500. So that was mind-blowing to hear that. No idea what it was like in Spain, but if they were able to broadcast it there, I'm sure they would have had some decent numbers as well. But before we leave, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Mike. The headline, though, contradicts what we are saying. So, because they say it's the Indy 500's national TV numbers worse than 31 years of live coverage. Might be the case. But if we look at the international numbers, I'm sure that it's a record internationally. And that's the type of maybe environment you need to check is the international ratings and the amount of places that picked up the Indy 500 that would not have picked up. I don't think the Spanish channel that did show the Indy 500 would have if Fernando Alonso wasn't driving with McLaren Honda on last Sunday.
Yeah, I don't think it probably would have been broadcast there at all if he wasn't in it. So that is very interesting to see that internationally the numbers are pretty good, but domestically they aren't. I mean, I thought that when you looked at the stands around the circuit that it looked quite full, but then when you saw the overhead shots, some of the stands and the bleachers weren't quite as full as I thought they were. So what the total attendance was for race day itself, I'm not really too sure.
I think it was a tad over 300. And that's the normal. It used to be like 5, though. Like back in the heyday of late 80s until the late 90s, maybe. Yep. Up until mid 90s, because then it started with the display and everything. Yep. Up until like Villeneuve in 95, I think that's kind of the last big Indy 500 up until. But then it was like 400 or 500. Like the capacity of it in Indianapolis Motor Speedway is mind-boggling, Mark. It's still to this day the most attended one-day sporting event in the world. It's the Indy 500.
Yep.
So it's still, even though it's not like 500,000 like it used to be, 300,000, not too shabby.
Yeah, that's definitely nothing to turn your nose up at. And, I did find it fairly enjoyable to watch. Like I say, it's the first one that I'd watched in a number of years. And, honestly, when the race goes for as long as it does, I find that it does take a little bit more effort to kind of sit through it than, say, maybe a normal Formula One race. Because, with F1, you're getting a maximum 2 hours no matter what happens, right?
Well, and that's how I watch my Indy 500. I put it in the background for the first 150 laps. It was playing while I was playing. I was playing Project Cars while I was watching Indy 500 in the background. Yes, I know, I'm living the life. But I was playing Project Cars, and the first 100-something lap, I was paying attention. I was watching. I was listening. I was very attentive when Scott Dixon had his crash and the other few crashes. Colin as well, the crash pretty hard, and he slipped and he tried to do a pass. So anyways, we're not going to talk about every single incident that happened because we're going to have a 10-hour show. But I do feel like it's the first 150 laps, background, then you pay attention for the last hour.
Yeah, I think it's basically getting through those first several pit stops, keeping your nose clean and staying there in contention, staying near the front of the pack to make a run for the lead and just be there or thereabouts in those last, that final stint, that last 15, 20, 50 laps, whatever it is. And it can be pretty exciting. It's just too bad for Fernando that he got so very, very close. But now let's talk about the big incident that had everybody talking, and that was Scott Dixon's crash around about lap 50 or 55 thereabouts. He collided with Jay Howard, who ran wide in the corner there, hit the wall and sort of glanced off of it, came back across the track and collected Dixon. Dixon hit Howard's car and launched him. Yeah.
Acted like a launching ramp. The two wheels. It's funny because we saw that happen in both races on Sunday.
Yes.
We saw it happen with Button, with a silly move that Button tried to move to pull on Verline. We'll talk about this later. Well, we saw this happen in the 500 too, but what could have been grave consequences. And fortunately, Indy cars, they learned it the hard way, but it's a safe car now.
Yeah, and I think that's what really made it frightening for me was how far he actually flew through the air. And it's really hard to get a scale, a reference of how far he actually flew when you look from the different camera angles, but it was a lot. I mean, maybe it was 50 yards, maybe it was 100 yards, hard to tell. Anyways, the way that he impacted and the height, yes, that was frightening. And the way that you see
higher
the car.
than the fencing. Imagine if the way the track is made and the distance with the fence and the grass before, it's going to be difficult to have that height close to the fence, because if you get launched with two cars colliding, it happens on the track. But still, the height of that, imagine if that was closer to the fence and the car with I don't even want to say it, because we had accidents in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway history. And if you actually have some free time in the near future, Google Indianapolis Indy 500 history, and there's 101 races, a lot of stories, amazing stories with this race, and a lot of tragic stories, unfortunately. And that's what I thought that I was seeing when I saw Scott Dixon take flight. And I actually was scared, and I had flashback of Greg Moore, and I was like, no, please, not the day that everybody watches. This. Yeah. Come on. And unfortunately, Scott Dixon is fine.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes to show how well these cars are engineered now, because the car did what it was supposed to do. Because when you see the way that he impacts the wall, it's sort of he flips upside down and then impacts it on the right, sort of the middle of the right side of the car on the radiator, and then you just see how the car just breaks apart. You see the rear end kind of fly off, and you just see the car basically disintegrate everywhere except for the survival cell around the cockpit, and that fortunately was completely intact. And of course, these cars are designed to do that, just to basically break apart to help dissipate the energy. But still, that was frightening. And actually, I have a GIF of it. I tweeted it out on the show Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. So if you haven't seen it, and if you haven't by now, I'd be surprised. But it is a frightening moment. And it's amazing to think that both of those guys both went to the medical center and got checked out, and were both cleared. And Scott Dixon did go back later on for a walking boot. So if that's the worst thing that happened to him, that's just a miracle. I mean, that could have ended obviously a whole lot worse than it did. So. Anyways, yes, Takuma Sato, ex-Formula One driver, wins it. First Japanese driver. Maybe not the one guy that we were picking, but one of Alonso's Andretti teammates. So he, of course, he had one of the better cars there. So I suppose
he had one of the engines that didn't blow, because it was ironic that a few Honda engines blew, and we kind of expected it, because during the week leading up to the training session week. 9 and Honda engine blew up until carb day. So it was kind of expected that a few Honda engine might give out, and it did. But won, and Takuma Sato, with a few daring move late in the race, got the job done.
Well, good for him. So what do you think? We've sort of gotten halfway through the show now without actually talking about the sport that this podcast is actually about.
Yep. Well, I just wanted to wrap up our Indy 500 coverage.
Sure.
I want to thank Fernando Alonso for the risk that he took, for all the right reasons, for making me rediscover IndyCar racing, for making me rediscover racing outside of Formula One in general, for making me discover Le Mans once again because of his ambition. It made me look into it, and I've rediscovered why it's so fun racing, and at every level, not just Formula One. And I want to say thank you, Fernando. Gracias, amigo.
Absolutely. It was a real eye opener, and it was good fun to watch, as was the Monaco Grand Prix, I thought.
Really?
Very interesting. Some parts were.
Some parts.
Well,
some of them were like a procession, but some parts were interesting.
Well, that's basically every single Monaco Grand Prix that's ever been run in modern times, at any rate. But I thought with Monaco, I thought that the qualifying I thought was exceptionally interesting, as was I'd say at least the start of the Grand Prix, because you had the Ferrari front row lockout, and you had Lewis Hamilton, who completely got things wrong with the setup on his car. It's interesting when you actually listen to both of the Mercedes drivers and the way that they explain what went wrong, that as they actually did more work on the car to try and dial it in and get it to improve on the setup, it actually got worse. Yes, it actually got worse. And while Bottas actually did fairly decent to get where he was to at least start the race, Lewis Hamilton starting in 13th position. I mean, he got the benefit of moving up one spot because Jenson Button moved all the way back to the end of the grid. Welcome back, Jenson. Yeah.
Oh, terrible day for Jenson Button. Terrible day for McLaren, if you think about it, because all their 3 cars didn't finish.
Well, I guess about the only bright spot in McLaren's entire day was that welcome, or not the welcome message, but the good luck message Jenson got from Fernando when he was going out for the formation lap, and then he told Fernando that he would take care of his car, but he might pee in his seat. So I don't know
how I was impressed, Mark. Doing radio, connecting, knowing what it is, the trouble to connect to people and make it good. They connected with him in Indianapolis through the racing setup that Button in the car could talk to Jenson Button from Monaco to. I was impressed.
Yeah, I thought that was a very, very cool moment. I thought that was really neat because it actually took a minute for it to register in my mind what was actually happening. I thought, well, who are they talking to? And then all of a sudden I realized when I actually paid attention and looked at the screen a little bit closer and saw that it was actually Fernando that was talking to Jenson. But I thought it was great. And it was an interesting situation to see how Button would acquit himself in the car. And I mean, let's be fair. I mean, he did have a good qualifying. I mean, he put the car on 9th on the grid before taking all those grid penalties. And I mean, he was a little bit quicker than his teammate, Stoffel Vandoorne. So, he just made it, into the top 10 shootout. But the race itself was one to forget for Jenson Button. He, along with Pascal Wehrlein, did that pit stop to change tires. What was it, like on the first or second lap? And it just didn't work out for either of them. And they had no speed. And, well, he never really got any further up the field, and then tried that harebrained passing maneuver into Porsche, and then punted Wehrlein onto the side of his car, which is a weird accident. I don't think I've ever seen, well, 2 things. I've never seen a car flip up on its side like that. And number 2, I don't think I've seen anybody ever try and pass another car at Porsche. For those of you that's the end, that corner just before they go into the tunnel at Monaco.
It's interesting to see Button, his comments all across the weekend, because he's kind of discovering the car very differently than all the other ones. He comes like blind, right? He hasn't tested with it before, so he comes, and the way he describes it is different too. And he's like, those are beasts. And he's like, I have so much more confidence now. I can overtake. And we saw him overtake Vettel in a practice session. And it was a very beautiful overtake in a different spot, but in a spot that usually don't overtake. I can't remember if it was, I think it was Raskas, but I'm not sure 100%. And it was a daring move, and he pulled it off, and that gave him confidence. And I think he did overshot, right? He did bite off more than he can chew, and Verlaine just didn't really see him and didn't expect Button to dive in, and Button thought that he could because of the car and the tires, and more confident because there's more grip and more downforce, and he feels better with it. So all those things combined led to that accident. But I have to say, Button in qualifying, Mark, he would have started 9th. That's not bad at all. So maybe there is something to that car that could be squeezed out, but reliability and race procedures, race protocol, and basically race operations have been lacking for McLaren.
Yeah, and that's basically summed up their entire season. I mean, they have been able to get more power out of the engine. They've gotten a little bit more reliability out of the engine because, let's be fair, it wasn't the engine that let go on Button. It was the result of the accident that he had that with Pascal Wehrlein that broke the suspension and the steering arm on his car. So that's not Honda's fault. Well, I mean, they might see a bit of a silver lining in that cloud, but that's the whole thing. And unfortunately, again, a double DNF, triple DNF, if you take into account Fernando Alonso over at Indy, like you say. But
does Eric Broulier finish the season? Like, I'm at that point now. Why? Because something has to be done to shake up things, right?
Yeah.
And there's only so much thing that actually can be done. So it's all about perception. What do? Do you do something that's very rare in Formula One, and that's firing the team director mid-season? Do you go that route? Something has to be done.
Yeah, it's interesting because even like last year when Ferrari was struggling, there were even people starting to make questions about Maurizio Arrivabene, and perhaps maybe he wasn't the guy to lead Ferrari and lead them back to championship glory. And obviously McLaren is not Ferrari. I mean, they're not as popular, huge, or have a huge fan base as Ferrari, but they still are Formula One's most popular teams. They're one of Formula One's most successful teams. God only knows how many drivers and constructors championships that they have. I don't know off the top of my head. So like you say, it is a lot of perception. It's why are they doing so bad? What are they doing to fix it? And at some point, somebody's going to have to pay the price. I know that Honda parted way with one of their engine chiefs a couple of months ago, but at some point, something really needs to be done to shake this whole program up, because I think that we've gotten to the point where it's obviously beyond not being acceptable. I mean, it should be to the point where there's going to be some constructive and some positive moves, and we just haven't seen that enough yet. I mean,
and I do feel Zach Brown is trying to do the right thing. His personal implication, in how the Indy 500 thing happened with Alonso, I think tells a lot. And I think there's a lot of sentiment of failure towards where it all went down the last 3-4 years, and how they have not been able to live up to the promises that they have made to Alonso in writing that will give you a performing car. And it's not happening. And I think there's a lot of that sentiment in Zach Brown, that we failed in giving you a competitive car, but now how to do going forward. And it's coming to the end of Alonso's contract. It's coming to an interesting time where no more Button, no more Alonso. Van Dorn, if this year continues, he's not showing a lot when a driver comes out of nowhere or comes out of retirement for a one-off with a car that doesn't have the same parts, same development as the other one, and out-qualifies him. Doesn't say a lot of good things for Van Dorn, and maybe it's unfair on Van Dorn, brand new driver, and has a terrible car. But the way things are going, maybe there's a little broom that needs to be put to work in McLaren, and a little clean sweep needs to be done or something.
Well, absolutely, because, sitting here a quarter of a way through the 2017 Formula One season, I would not have expected to see that the only team in Formula One that does not have a single point in the Constructors' Championship would be McLaren Honda. The Sauber Ferrari only has 4 points, but still, you would have thought that McLaren would have gotten something by now. So, I mean, the situation is desperate. Let's be honest. It's gone way too far. It's gotten way out of hand. And
look, Sauber has a terrible budget goal. If you compare the two, there's no reason. And if you're like an investor of McLaren, you have to be angry, right?
Absolutely.
And that's why I'm like, I might be harsh. And it's terrible because Eric Boullier seems like a nice guy. And Zach Brown seems like a good leader of men. And I kind of have confidence of where Zach Brown can bring this team. And it's kind of interesting to see an American in that type of role too. And I want to see what he can do with it. But with the money that McLaren is putting in Formula One, it has to be better. It has to.
It absolutely has to. And there is a big gap, I think, in the amount of money that's being spent when you look at teams like McLaren, Sauber, and Haas, who are the two teams that are immediately above them in the Constructors' Championships. Haas are in 8th position in that championship. They only have 14 points this year, and Renault is 7th in the Constructors with 14 points as well. So not really all that far ahead, but when you consider how much more reliable and how much better that even the Haas and the Renault are, and those are basically second-year cars. I mean, the Renault is the first one that they've designed and built since they took over Lotus I guess it was just before the start of last season, and Haas is in their second year. So I guess you could make the argument that they're about where they should be, but McLaren obviously has to be a lot further up. The question I have now is that if Manor Racing had not gone bankrupt and was actually in Formula One racing this year, would they have points in the Constructors' Championship? Would McLaren actually be behind a team like Manor Racing? That for me is the $64,000 question right now.
They would have had a Charlotte Monaco though, so maybe. That's true.
But let's talk about some of the other things that happened in the race. Obviously, I was very surprised at how quickly the Ferraris pulled away at the start there. And for once, it was a clean start. You got the entire field through the first corner Saint-Avold, and there were obviously a safety car. It always seems to happen at one point, but I was absolutely shocked at how quickly they pulled away. Like, even in that first lap, just how much faster they were than the other the other cars there. I mean, obviously, as we were talking about, Hamilton was a non-factor, but even Bottas and the other Mercedes just was not able really to keep touch. And my big question, and I think a lot of people are asking this one too, especially with the controversy after the race between Räikkönen and Vettel and the whole, the supposed team orders and how that whole pit strategy worked out between Räikkönen and Sebstian Vettel. But I was interested to see how Räikkönen and Vettel were pulling away from the other cars, and then it kind of stabilized, and Vettel, that was an interesting situation to watch, because when Räikkönen went in for his pit stop, he put in several really, really hot laps. And when it all sort of shook out and he came out after his pit stop, the margin that he got in front of Kimi Räikkönen was only a couple of car lengths. And of course, at Monaco, that's all you really need, because very, very difficult to pass there. And even Hamilton.
But Vettel was faster. Vettel was a bit faster than Räikkönen, to be quite fair. So he was just stuck behind Räikkönen for half the race. But I don't think it was team orders. And even though I feel like Räikkönen jobbed to Seb, like I mentioned on social media, and tweeted got some tracking, I still feel like it can't have been orchestrated, because it was too perfect. You cannot plan something to that extent. You cannot try to do a okay, we'll do a team order and we'll kind of hide it in a way that we'll do like a logical kind of pit strategy, but we won't execute it perfectly, and we'll have Seb come in front. No, like you can't want to do it, but you're never going to pull it off the way it actually happened. It's almost a fluke, and the other drivers stuck in the behind cars, and the other races for other position led to Sebstian Vettel be able to literally have more space and clean air, and the car was good enough at that moment and the conditions were perfect. It cannot have been planned the way it happened, so I don't think it was orchestrated. But once you stumble upon a result, and once you figured out that maybe the engineer figured it out just a few minutes before it actually happened, well, they let it happen too. They're not like, you know what, maybe if we do this and that, actually he can win. Okay, maybe you do it. So I think there's shades of gray maybe somewhere in there where you stumble upon a favorable result. You're not going to maybe kibosh that.
Yeah, and I think that, like you say, it would have been very difficult to hide that in a pit stop. But I think what was odd was that it was Räikkönen that came in first, when you might expect that the car that's maybe in second position would be the one to go in and change tires first of all. So I think maybe that was where the surprise was for a lot of people. But on the flip side of that, you have to remember that it is Sebstian Vettel that is challenging and leading the World Championship at the moment. So if there is going to be a situation where one of those two guys is going to get the benefit of the race strategy and get the priority, it's going to be Sebstian Vettel, because, okay, as great as it would be to see Kimi Räikkönen win the Monaco Grand Prix, he's not the one that's trying to win the World Championship at the moment. It's his teammate. And just that difference of coming in first or second, that can make all the difference at the end of the year. I mean, we look at the World Drivers' Championship last year between Hamilton and Rosberg. That came down at the end of the year to what, 5 points, 6 points between the two. So, I mean, that's the difference between finishing first or second, right? And then even Hamilton said that, coming back up from 13th and finishing 7th in the race was great. He wasn't expecting to get up as high as that was. He was hoping for top 10, but to get a couple of extra places. And again, it doesn't really sound like a lot, but to get those 5 or 6 points or whatever it is could make a very big difference. And we've seen championships many times decided by a couple of points, sometimes even less.
I think it tells us a lot that even though over the years we've put a lot of weight on the Constructors' Championship, and it is important, the Drivers' Championship, this is where the money is. This is where the accolades truly reside, is in the driver standings, with the reaction of a Vettel and Ferrari to get the most amount of points versus Lewis in an opportunity that might not represent itself the rest of the season. You now have a gap of 25 points with Vettel on top of Hamilton in position 1 and 2 in the standings. And that is, it's logical. It makes sense. It's cold. It's unfortunate. It's really terrible for Kimi. But again, the better of the whole, like, it's better than the sum of its part, right? The whole is bigger than the sum of its part. And I think Vettel and Ferrari, unfortunately for Kimi, are bigger than Kimi.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's where it is right now, and Kimi might not like it, but like I say, unfortunately, he's not the one that's leading the World Championship at the moment. And if he wants to get that preferential treatment, if that does exist in the team, and it probably does because it is Ferrari and we all know their history, then he's going to have to fight for it. He's going to have to get up there and challenge Sebstian Vettel, I suppose. But he wasn't the only one that was complaining about the pit strategy, and there was also happened at Red Bull, because you had a similar situation with Max Verstappen and his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, and Ricciardo stayed out longer than Verstappen, and that was, I have to admit, that really surprised me when you saw Ricciardo where he was, and then when those pit stops all shook out, he ended up in third position. I did a double take when I was looking at the where everybody was on the track, and to see Daniel Ricciardo move up from fifth and end up in fifth at that point was a real surprise. So, I mean, well played by him, but you can understand why Verstappen would be upset as well. But you kind of think that it's these sorts of things on a track like Monaco. I think that they're just amplified than they might be more than in regular situations on normal tracks. And Max, he was really quite heated. It took him a long time to come out and speak to the media after the race. So he wasn't happy, but I think eventually he figured out what was going on. And again,
yeah, but Ricciardo was faster than Max though.
Yeah.
During the race. So this, I think it's a bit of the same situation that Ferrari did. Yeah. Qualifying, Verstappen was faster and than his partner and his teammate, than Ricciardo. And Räikkönen was faster than Vettel. But race pace, it's a totally different animal.
Yep.
And experience shown. And Ricciardo is fast in Monaco. Let's not forget last year he should have won. So, yeah, a lot of unfortunate things happen sometimes for Red Bull, but Ricciardo, podium, I think it's fortunate for him. He was happy. He almost lost it late, and that was interesting, right? That yellow car late in the race actually made the last few laps that would have been boring quite interesting with the battle for second, third, and fourth, because Bottas was really trying to get close as possible, even though it's so terrible and impossible to pass in Monaco.
Yeah, and Hamilton even said as well that it was just it was literally impossible to get around there. But the battle between Bottas and Verstappen was interesting to watch, because Max, he was really tucked up underneath Bottas's gearbox quite a number of times, but you can just really see the difference in the power between the Renault engine and the Mercedes, because every time they came out of those corners, all Bottas had to do was put his foot down and he would just pull away. So I mean, Max could get tantalizingly close, but never quite close enough to make the pass to get around Bottas. And I was just thinking too a little bit earlier today, was when was the last time that we didn't see Mercedes on the podium, like in such a situation? I mean, we've seen it before, obviously, because Rosberg,
they took each other out.
Yeah, they took each other. Yeah, exactly. They took each other out. But to see that Bottas was as close to the podium in P4 is completely unusual territory for Mercedes.
The last time there was no Mercedes on the top of on the podium was Spain 2016. So that's interesting. One quick bit of information, Mark, that I just want to put in there too. You talked about how impressive Ferrari were there at the start and how impressive their domination in Monaco was. And it's apparently due to mechanical grip. For some reason, downforce, but grip itself, the way Ferrari is built, and there's a lot of pieces, the triangles for the suspension up front, inside that little nozzle, the muzzle, that front part of the car. There's a lot of different ways it's built. And with Ferrari, it's a little bit more streamlined. Not that it's actually less technological, let's put it that way. It's a little bit more mechanical than technological. It's not as complicated. And sometimes easy is better. And sometimes when you take variables out of the equation, instead of adding more and having actuators and having everything trying to predict and to perfect and to make sure that everything is at the right angle at every perfect time, well, when everything is out of whack, it's not performing well. And that would explain a lot from what Mercedes have done in the weekend compared to Ferrari. When you keep it simple, sometimes you find the right solution and it's more efficient. And we have seen Ferrari being efficient. So I thought it was interesting because Toto Wolff talked about this and Christian Horner talked about this post-race. And I think it does give maybe a glimpse of why Ferrari is better this year so far, because of mechanical grip and a more efficient downforce and not an impeding downforce, which means that even in traffic, you can be good, even if you don't have clean air and perfect downforce. So I think those two factors make for an engine that's maybe up to par to the Merc one. But I think that's why Ferrari is doing better.
Yeah, well, there's been quite a lot of things said about the difference between the Ferrari and the Mercedes, and just how the Ferrari is better balanced. It's not quite as heavy, and it's just a better designed car. And I think that we really saw that illustrated almost to an extreme in Monaco. Just the difference in the performance between those two cars, just how the Ferrari looked like it was on rails the entire weekend. It looked quick. It looked like it was handling great around those tight corners in Monaco, and the Mercedes was anything but. So it has been something that has been talked about quite a bit this year, and I think that now that we've gotten the first quarter of the season out of the way, I think obviously that the results are going to go back and forth between the two teams and between the drivers throughout the entire year. But I think now we've seen enough through the first several races just to say definitively that the Ferrari is the better of the two.
Yeah, up to now, yeah, absolutely. That's I don't think there's a doubt now. With the different type of circuit that he actually went to, we've seen one of each at least, right? We've seen a urban circuit, which I think Monaco is. We've seen road circuits like Melbourne Park, and we've seen regular circuits. So I think across the board, the more polyvalent in French, the more, I hate when I'm finding my words. It's the more, not reliable, the more it can perform better or good at different type of circuit. It's actually, it can adjust, it can adapt to different type of circuit, and it's more rounded. Like, it's a more well-rounded car than just a car that's going to be fast at one type of circuit and struggle at others. And I think it's a more well-rounded produced car for Ferrari than the Merc.
Well, I think what's really interesting about it is if you look at the races that we've had so far this year, we've had, like you say, we've had regular tracks, we've had sort of an in-between track like Melbourne, we've had a street circuit that is sort of so Melbourne, and then Monaco, obviously. And then we've had wet races, we've had dry races, we've had races that have been raced in normal temperatures, we've been in the heat of the desert. So we've seen really a little bit of everything. And I think when you look at the broad picture, it is the Ferrari that is the better of the two cars. And when you hear Toto Wolff coming out and saying that they're the underdogs now in the championships, and they're really going to have to fight back and take it to Ferrari, then obviously that's what they're thinking as well. I don't think that is any sort of way of you sometimes you see in other sports the coach goes out and says something in the media to try and motivate their team. I mean, Formula One's a little bit different. So I mean, they know that they've got their work cut out for them, and it's going to be quite a long way. Well, I wouldn't say a long way, but definitely it's going to be a tough challenge for them, because once you get into the season, there's really only so much you can do with the car and develop it. And they've been saying even right from the testing at Barcelona back in February that they just didn't have the car balanced and just wasn't set up as well as they wanted to. So we're seeing it now.
Yep, and now we're going to have a very type of different circuit too in Montreal, in a circuit where brakes and engine will both be tested. And well, some teams have a couple of engine problems, and some teams like the Merc have brakes problem. And this race they had brake problem. It was a different type of brake problem. It was more of a not getting the temperature compared to overheating sometimes, and it's getting temperature into the tires, which is why mechanical grip is important, because mechanical grip creates friction on the tire, which create heat, which create more higher temperature for the tires. And the Merc does not produce that as efficiently as the Ferrari, which leads me to the Merc's reliability could be an issue in Montreal. McLaren obviously will be an issue for reliability in Montreal, but I think it's not going to be that easy. But if reliability is there, I think we will see the power of the Merc engine back, maybe. So it could be a totally different story in Montreal. But I think those points, I know those points on the board that Vettel did put, Mark, they're not going anywhere. That 25-point gap is there until Lewis does something about it.
Well, we've seen in the past that that doesn't necessarily rule Lewis Hamilton out, because Nico Rosberg had, 43 points lead at the top of the World Drivers' Championship last year, and Lewis managed to close that gap completely and even get ahead of Nico at one point. So you can't count Lewis Hamilton out by any means, but it's going to be fascinating to watch from here. There's going to be lots of tracks that are going to be better suited to each one of these cars. So I expect both of these guys to trade punches, basically the rest of the season, and it should be enjoyable to watch. And Lewis might be starting to wonder what he's done, maybe feeling a little bit like he's angered some of the gods or something, because here he finds himself fighting back for the second year in a row. And I think maybe what with Rosberg retiring at the end of last season, maybe, I don't know, maybe he didn't, but I just kind of think that maybe Lewis was expecting to have a bit of an easier time in the World Championship. And I know it's fairly friendly with Vettel right now. Had they actually tangled worse in Barcelona and taken each other out, it might have had a little bit of bad blood, but I think that
it's friendly. Yes, Mark, it's friendly on, I think Vettel likes anyone. The way, because we get to see more and more of them, right? In different aspect, and you kind of, and look, we might be wrong on this, because we only see what we are shown. But from what I've been shown, Vettel seems like a nice guy who actually doesn't really have problem with anyone, and he rolls with the punches, and it's all well and good, and we're here to have some fun too, and he embraces it. As on Hamilton's side, I don't think it's that. I think Hamilton needs an opponent, needs an adversary to perform. And whatever shape that is, he's going to have to do this to motivate himself maybe. And last year was Rosberg. Just turns out it's his teammate. This year it might be Vettel. And if you go back to the grid, not this week, but the race prior, on the grid, after qualifying, they were like talking on the grid of, oh, you're starting here, you're starting here, you're starting here. And they were talking about the starting sequence, and Hamilton threw a little jab at Vettel, say, "Hey, apparently you got a new racing starting sequence on the grid too, eh? To start on the Sunday morning when there's the race start, you have a sequence of things you do. You put your cars in certain mode, and it starts, right? And they have a special lever that they use for McLaren, for Mercedes, I mean, and that way of starting the car was taken by Ferrari and copied or reverse engineered, probably more than copied. Mm-hmm. And they were able to develop something similar. And that was kind of what Hamilton mentioned in front of all the cameras to Vettel in like of a jab, saying, "Oh, so you got a brand new starting sequence, eh?" Knowing that Vettel knows that it's based on Hamilton's one. So I think it's always going to stay friendly from Vettel versus Hamilton. But the other way around, I think Lewis needs that motivation. And yeah, I think when he has an opponent, it's easier for him to know who he's fighting against.
Yeah, absolutely. And just talking a little bit more about Sebstian Vettel, he actually got a reprimand at Monaco. He exceeded the pit limits coming out to rejoin the track for the start of Q3. And I remember watching it and seeing that he just put his left front wheel over the painted line coming out of the pit lane. And I was wondering at that point if there was going to be some sort of punishment. And he was given a reprimand. No action will be taken against him just yet, because you have to be reprimanded, I believe it's a total of 3 times in the space of 1 year. Some other guys tend to rack up these things a little bit quicker than others, but Sebstian did get a little rap on the knuckles for a little tiny small bit of a naughty behavior, but very small. Yep. and very inconsequential when you look at things.
Yeah, it's 3 reprimands, and you have a grid penalty after that.
Very good. Well, Kevin, I don't know about you, but I think that's all about I've got for this week. What's going on with the network?
Scuderia F1, always. You can find it on sportspodcastnetwork.com. And the soccer today, we're back on Thursday, maybe a show tomorrow afternoon, but that's still up for a debate for sure. Thursday, 10 a.m., we'll be talking about, of course, the Voyageurs Cup and the Canadian national team with Octavian Zambrano. He was in town on Tuesday, and we will have some interesting guests on Thursday as well. So sportspodcastingnetwork.com, on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Puppet Player. You can find me on Twitter at Kev Laramée, and find the links to all our Facebook Live shows on our Facebook page, facebook.com/sportspodcastingnetwork.
Very good. Well, thank you very much again this week, Kevin. And of course, you can follow this show on Twitter at Scuderia F1 Pod. And that's it. That's a wrap. We'll catch you guys again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Scuderia F1 podcast. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, then head over to ScuderiaF1pod.com. Want to get in touch with us? Then email us at ScuderiaF1pod@gmail.com.
You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.